November 6th. This is the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting for the School District of Waukesha. Can we verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
The meeting has been posted properly.
Thank you. We are now at the point for public comment. We do have one speaker tonight. Because there are 6 speakers or less, speakers will be notified at 3 minutes, but allowed up to 5 minutes to complete their comments. We expect all speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using any inappropriate language, and be respectful in their comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future board or committee meetings. Speakers are to adhere to the board, not to the audience. The school board and this board committee does not endorse any comments made by members of the community here tonight. We would like to remind our community members of the impact of their words on others and that our children are watching. We commit to communicating with you in respectful and productive ways and ask that you do the same. We also expect that the audience will be respectful of the speaker and of the board and refrain from responding with verbal comments, cheering, applause, or other behavior that will distract from the meeting. Please note that no obstructions can be created between the board and the audience. Visual aids cannot be used, and the area behind the speaker and podium will be clear during public comment. Also, in order to respect our speakers, meeting participants, please silence your cell phone. Our first speaker tonight is Paul Reese.
Good evening. Today I saw in the paper that, or in the Freeman on their Facebook page, that you were going to discuss what you're going to do with North Swimming Pool. And I've spoken on this a couple times. And North Swimming Pool has been antiquated since the day they built it. They decided that they were convinced, a different school board a long time ago was convinced to make a meter pool. And they were convinced that, oh yeah, this will be the thing of the future. Everyone's going to go to meters. And nobody did, because they didn't do the math and figure out that every school would have to build a new pool, and every university across this country would have to build a new pool in order for it to work. So we got stuck with a meter pool. Also, there's no seating inside of that pool. The bleachers are terrible. It's been obsolete since the time it was built. My daughter swims with West, and she swims on the West, and it's called the West Swim Dive Team. There's no diving at North. You can't dive there. There's no diving board in North. Its pool is too shallow, or the rise comes too early. So it's not. They don't even have competitions when they have their meets, their home meets. They have to do the North somewhere else because there's not a diving board in the school. So it has its problems. It has its seating problems, its lighting problems. There's just a lot of issues with that pool. In order to bring it up to date, you really would have to dig it out and replace it, is either your choice, or to do something else with it. Now, when it comes to swimming, my daughter's in it. So one thing about this is all the girls who swim, especially varsity in this town, they all know each other. They all swam club together. They're familiar with each other. They're friends. It's kind of fun to go to all the meets because they sit around and chat with each other because that's what they do every other weekend when they're in club. So that's kind of fun. So joining them together wouldn't be that big of a deal. You'd probably want to go to South, I would imagine, if you combine teams, because South has 8 lanes, North and West have 6, and South also has a warm-up lane, so they got plenty of room at South to swim in. KM probably could go to West. It would make more sense financially. I hope you guys, when you talk about this, the cost of running a pool, to have 3 of them in a district, which swim teams are they're very small. West is, even though we won conference champions this year, only 4 girls made it to state. North, last year, I know they had 1. South, I think, had 1 or 2 seniors this year. The enrollment's down, so it's showing in the team. So it'd be nice to have a boost in enrollment in a team so you could compete against teams like Arrowhead and Muskego, which really dominate when it comes to swimming in this conference or region.
2 minutes.
Anyway, so I've talked before about this, and I hope you guys, you have my support for what that's worth. But I really think it should be looked at and discussed, and that pool has been antiquated for a long time. It would be a good use for something else in that school, and it wouldn't hurt to combine the teams. So anyways, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Reese. Moving on to our action items for this evening.
Yeah, Mrs. Chairman, I would move to amend the agenda by moving the discussion of the approval of the express swim contract ahead of our discussion of the North High School pool project in our action items area. Actually, I think both of them well, I don't know, I shouldn't say this, but I'm wondering if either one of these are ultimately going to be approval items tonight. But in any event, wherever they land, I would like to switch the order. I kind of sense that there may be some advantage to discussing the express contract ahead of the pool project. We can either do that by unanimous consent, or it would take a 2/3 vote, if anyone objects.
So I don't see an issue with that. Great. So moving on, the first item is the approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Ms. White?
Second?
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Discussion first? Can we have discussion first, before the approval, before the voting?
Yes.
Okay, one thing that I would note is that in the minutes, there was a statement saying that there were no questions about the approval of vouchers, and I had raised some questions about the cost of water, knowing that utilities are 10% of our budget, going up by 10%, et cetera. Wanting to speak to that change of the water coming in from Lake Michigan, and that wasn't included in the minutes.
Got it. Thank you, Mrs. White. Noted?
Yeah, we can amend those, or,
Correct.
yeah, it's an oversight.
Any other discussion items? Okay. All those in favor of the amended minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Passes 5-0. Our next action item is the approval of the vouchers. Were there any questions?
There were no questions this month.
Okay. I do have one follow-up on the vouchers, only in the review. It's not a question. Just one of the items that we've been talking about in the past was the dues and subscriptions that the board subscribes to, one of those being the WASB dues, which was approved and paid this month for $14,639. I just wanted to keep that on the record as one of those things that we have been talking about, as well as continued discussions about the support and the research that we get from them. I think the convention that is held in January will be another big experience for this board to experience and understand the value of the partnership with WASB. Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. I could comment just briefly on that since I brought with me. On Saturday, I attended the WASB Fall Legislative Conference in Green Lake. It was reasonably well attended, I thought, for a Saturday. The topics on the agenda, there was a Q&A conversation with Representative Kitchens. There was a discussion about enrollment, which I think will be relevant to this committee. There was discussion about governance and public opinion related to public education, which I think would be a potential good discussion for our policy committee. And the other topic was, I'm trying to recall now. Oh, actually, there was Marquette. There's a representative from the Marquette Law School poll that was talking about public opinions, and then there was also a conversation about governance and politicization in particular. In anticipation of the January meeting, I think relative to the payment that we just made, I do think it's important that more of us participate. I made a commitment by making the recommendation that we should engage maybe at a deeper level to ensure that WASB is aligned and we are aligned to some of their priorities. Frankly, I felt that the conference on Saturday was maybe a little bit not what I was expecting, but they're always open to feedback and ready to provide that. But I would like to see more of us participating in those events if we're going to try to justify getting our money's worth out of the membership. We've got about a year now to figure out how that's going to work for us, so let's just like to share that. Thank you.
Great feedback. Thank you, Dr. Piasek. Is there any other discussion? Be looking for a motion to approve the vouchers.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay. Vouchers have been approved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Okay, passes 5-0. Okay, the next item for discussion or action is the Express Swim contract. Mr. Clark.
Yeah, every 4 or 5 years, we look to have the board consider the renewal of the lease agreement with Express Swim for the South Pool. And we were nearing that time. The structure of the agreement is 3 years, but then 2 one-year options. So we're not to the end of the contract, but we thought, well, this would be a good time to review it. The document itself, we really haven't changed a whole lot in terms of language. We've had this arrangement for several years now, so there's nothing new. But one thing I would draw your attention to, and as Mr. Watt mentioned, we're not ready for approval. We're close, but I didn't hear back, so we'll bring it back in December. But I thought it would be good for us to at least review where we are with the contract as of now, so in December, it can maybe be a quick discussion or not. But one thing that we're struggling with, or they are struggling with, is, read on the page 4, is their enrollment. Their participation levels are down about a third. And I think it probably has a lot to do with COVID. We had 2 years where we lost 2 years of kids getting involved in swim and all of that. So the fee structure itself, we used to have a set fee quarterly payment that they would pay. We're throwing out, and really I just wanted to get your feedback on, and it's on page 4, is a sliding scale of what their fee, that's perfect, is a sliding scale based on the number of participants they have. And I left in the red is what we had, so you can see how simple it was, but historically they're, like all of us, we're struggling to have enrollment or participation levels. And then we would measure it every August by the number of kids who are signed up with Swim America, I believe. So there'd be an actual snapshot, and then that following year's payments would be tied to whatever that number of students are. So that's really the only difference that we're looking at. Again, we would stay with the 3-year contract with two 1-year add-ons as well.
Mrs. White.
Looking at this, the 225 was the base for our, previous rental amount. What is their current enrollment at this point? Is it the 225?
They're sub 250, yeah.
They're under 250?
Yep.
Okay.
So we hold it flat, and then if they get back to where they've been historically, it would be an 8% increase. And it could vary year to year as well, but the bookends would be 0 to 8%. And I should note, the proceeds from this lease agreement are divided. Some of it gets coded to Fund 10, our operational fund, but other funds get coded to our maintenance fund. And they help fund improvements. This past year, we installed brand-new scoreboards at South High School, and that was funded through Express Swim proceeds. It didn't happen all in 1 year, but we did save up those dollars to reinvest in the school.
Mr. Wad.
So just so I'm clear, the current participation rate would mean basically the cost would remain flat to them? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I understand their enrollment is down, but my guess is that enrollment has little to do with maintenance costs. Like, I'm assuming that the maintenance costs are the maintenance costs, whether one person uses the pool or 500 uses the pool. Have we seen an increase in maintenance costs since the last contract was signed? And if so, is there a reason why we aren't passing along some of those maintenance costs and instead keeping the rate flat? Is there a concession we're getting in exchange for that, or?
It's more of circumstance, and it's a fair question. There's certainly been an increase in everything. Inflation's hitting every sector, right? But what's unique about the timing of this is, and this would have been before you were on the board, all the equipment for the south pool was just swapped out due to a flood in the mechanical room below it. So we're anticipating the maintenance costs for the south pool, because the bleachers have been replaced, the lighting was upgraded, deck improvements were made, and then all the mechanicals were completely replaced 2 summers ago, I'm looking. So we're looking at kind of a lull in those costs, because and now with the scoreboards especially, that building should be good for the term of this contract.
Thank you.
Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. Is there anything else that's changing in terms of the usage schedule or the locations or anything day to day?
No. One of the things that we're working on, and it's tied to the other agenda item, is in Article 1, we built in time for swim lessons out at West. We've been in discussions, and this is jumping ahead or backwards, or whatever the agenda is, with terms of North. One of the things with involving the North Pool, if a decision was made to repurpose it, is Special Olympics would need a home. So I'm looking for a decision on the North Pool, whatever that is, to be made before we approve this contract. Because I don't want to tie our hands with windows of time that everyone wants right after school and before dinner, right? So I would hold off, and it's one of the reasons I've asked that this contract be postponed till December.
That was the nature of my question, too, so thank you.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, so in the same vein, as we consider the possibility of closing the North Pool, if that were to occur, would that place additional strain on, or make it more difficult for usage by the public, by Express, who will be paying to use that, by our other athletic programs and other events at West and South? My assumption, and we can get into some of this when we talk about the North Pool, is competitions would be unimpacted, right? Because North isn't used for any competitive swim that I'm aware of. I don't know from a practice perspective what additional strains that would put on those additional pools, but I guess I'm wondering if anyone has taken a look at that in terms of how it may or may not impact this contract, or the terms of it, if there is some shifting of what would normally be used at the North Pool to the other pools at South and West.
Yeah, good question. We'll bring back information on that. But one thing that just comes to my mind off the top of my head is participation levels with the teams now is so low, even if we did merging, it would still be below where those teams have been historically. And we operated them, but that's just me taking a flyer on that. But we will come back with that and see how that schedule would look.
Good. Mr. McCaffrey?
There's no sinking fund in this agreement? I didn't see it. Is it in there?
We
Or
code the
we factor
receipts
them in?
accounting wise. When the check hits our office, we break it.
We break
into-
it out, okay.
Yep.
So what, just for my edification, what is this, what are we putting away for the sinking fund?
Is it 60%? I want to say it's
I should
60%.
have probably emailed you before, so you had it, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I want to say it's 60% goes into the sinking fund.
Is it? Okay. It was a good amount, I know, because
Yeah.
we used it for a lot of things.
Oh, the touch pads and
Yes.
all of that, the upkeep of the old scoreboard, they took on a lot of costs there. They helped us, I believe, with they call it the crow's nest or whatever,
Yep.
to protect that because we were going through computer equipment like it was
Right.
going out of style.
Right, so we're still doing that.
Yeah, it looks like maybe 40% goes in.
40%?
Yep.
Excellent, thank you.
And maybe,
Any other-
I'm sorry, maybe I'll look to add that into
Okay.
the contract, just so
Well, yeah, just so
Express
it's-
knows as well.
They know exactly where that money's going, and we know. How much is gonna be in that account.
Any other questions or discussion on the Express contract? Okay, so moving into the next discussion item, which is the North High School Pool Project. And I want to remind the committee and the community that this topic has been in our discussions for the last several months, specifically under our capital improvements projects plan, which was an opportunity that we have been able to look at our infrastructures, understand where the needs are, have recommendations on needs. As we recall, just last month, the board and committee approved $9.1 million in other infrastructure costs that had the North Pool listed, but on hold for further discussion. And so today, that's really where we want to open up and have further discussions about what it requires to do any upgrades, community involvement, discussions, next steps, and really how we can overall support our community. So with that, Mr. Clark?
Yeah, this, I thought I'd just give a little background because of the questions we've gotten. This goes back to when the board approved $2.6 million of HVAC improvements to North High School. And when they were approved, we dove into a deep dive into how much work's gonna be done, what's the cost. And the North Pool is its own section, so we looked at the cost structure. And a variance came up between the cost of replacing the existing HVAC equipment for a pool versus multi-use. Pools are tough environments, chemicals and everything else, moisture. And then we factored in the age of the pool, the reinvestment that this area will likely be needing in the next few years. And we said, this is a time for us to do some due diligence to say, what's the path forward? Not that one's, much better than the other, but we're really going to tie ourselves to this decision for a long time if we go in there and do a bunch of HVAC work designed for a pool. So that led us to the start of this conversation, and as you mentioned, we've talked about it as part of the Phase 3 capital improvement projects in September and October. And then in October, Kyle McCarthy and I went out to North to meet with the Booster Club to garner their feedback as well. And part of the confusion and the questions we've gotten is I agendized it as action but also putting in my executive summary, we weren't looking for action. But I wanted to leave it out there as a topic. I wanted the discussion. I want your feedback. Kyle and I will take that back with us as we continue this debate. So I apologize if I caused more confusion than I meant. So with all that said, we're still coming up on a decision, and I think whatever happens, whether it's keep the pool or repurpose the space, I think it's important that the community sees us as us wanting to continue to invest in North High School. That's the end goal of all this debate. So, what do we know as we stand here tonight is the North Pool's aging, about 50 years old, and pools don't last forever. Actually, the South Pool, if I did my math right, was replaced about the time it got to be about 50 years old. I'm not saying we should replace the North Pool with a brand-new one or anything like that, but they do have a useful life, and we're nearing that time with the North Pool, I believe. I also think that, in terms of it, looking at it as an equity thing where, well, every high school has a pool, well, North also has a smaller gym. If we add one more station, then they would have the same size gym as some of our other schools. So equity is something that has several lenses that you can look through. And not that we shouldn't factor those in. We also are working through kind of every decision has ripple effects. Special Olympics uses the North Pool in February through the end of April. We also would have to do some legwork, and we have been doing legwork. What does SDW swim look like with staying with 3 pools versus going to 2, whether that's a co-op, or whether, co-op meaning bringing other districts in, or our co-ops internally. Lifeguard certification, we're investigating where else can you secure lifeguards certification. There's an instructional part of the swimming pool with FIAD and things like that, and other activities that happen out at North High School. What's the lens of the best approach? Is it a facility that might be used much more than the other? Maybe that's a factor as well. So we're kind of bringing all these things together into, at some point, a recommendation for this committee to consider and ultimately the full board. So I have some just background information that I thought might be helpful as we look at working our way through this. Oh, let me share my screen first. I think this is it. There we go. I'll zoom quick. Take this off. People don't see me. See if this works better. Why does it keep shrinking like that? That's. What was that?
It changes the resolution when you connect it.
How do I get it bigger?
I think you can just say command plus.
Oh, okay.
Display settings?
Yeah. Plus. Okay, I'll just read it to you. Now put it in board docs so everyone.
Display settings. Here's a drop down.
Oh,
Oh, now it's on. Okay. It's gonna fit the screen at the bottom.
how about I just read you these numbers? So the data that I'll share, and I'll put it in board docs so everyone can see it, is what's the participation in swim now at North High School, South High School, and West High School? In a minute, we'll go through what co-ops we currently have with neighboring school districts. And then we'll go through a list of sports and activities that we already merge high schools together for other activities, because I thought maybe that would be good information as well. Keep in mind that the 24 spring boys season, these are estimates of what they think participation levels are going to be. The girls swim season is actually ending, and if you saw my email, we're hosting that state meet at South High School this weekend if you want to attend. So in 22-23, at North High School, boys swim, we had 16 participants. 6 of them were North High School swimmers. 10 of them were outside the district through co-op agreements. Girls was 25 swimmers, 10 of them being North swimmers and 15 being out of district swimmers. Boys, what they're projecting for 2024 is 12 swimmers, with 4 of them being North swimmers, and then 8. And you can just see the math. The girls, it's 8 and 12. But one thing that stands out as I gathered the information is none of our swim teams are overly large at this point. And we're having problems with fielding varsity JV squads in several sports. South, where we have a fantastic facility. Last year, boys had 15 swimmers, girls were 27, a good solid number, I would think. But you can just see the numbers are not as strong as you what people might think with the background that Waukesha has with swim. And then West's numbers are also there for you to see. The co-op agreements, there's several. Right now, Waukesha South has co-op agreements with CMH for boys swim. They have a co-op agreement with McGuanago for girls swim. West has a co-op with CMH for girls. West has the boys from McGuanago. And then North right now has Kettle Moraine for both teams, and then add Pewaukee in for boys swim. And then the lower area is just all the things we do right now where we're merging our high schools. Some of them have some non-district high schools involved as well. But I thought that might be some good background information. Lastly, and this is in board docs, is kind of a quick financial summary I did in terms of, you know, what's the impact of the two paths. And as we all know, I would assume that everyone knows, the running pools are not cheap, but I really don't see this as a financial discussion. It's really what path do we want to take? The improvements for the HVAC are approved, but is that the best utilization of those funds is really the question. So we think there's chemical savings, staff compensation for the care and maintenance of the pool. Obviously utilities, we talked about that earlier. None of that's getting cheaper. The green one, I highlighted that because there's deferred maintenance for the north pool, but it's not going to come in one, even swoop of $40,000 per year. But yet, we've identified about $140,000 to $150,000 of work that needs to be done within the next couple of years. I couldn't put $150,000 in there either because it's one time. So I just plugged it as an average annual deferred maintenance, us addressing deferred maintenance. I just put $40,000 in there. It's kind of a placeholder, but there's some reality to that cost. And then a couple other miscellaneous categories in case power goes out, and some of the hurdles we have with that. And then lastly, the differential between the HVAC work for the pool versus improving the HVAC for a multi-use facility is estimated at $235,000. So if you break that out, I look at the HVAC work as a one-time cost. You'll have to do it at some point in the future, but it'll be hopefully decades. And then ongoing savings of $139,500 per year if we would move to not having the pool. But our discussions are about replacing it with something though, so there's costs associated with those renovations. So the estimates we have for the fill-in of the pool is $300,000. The flooring and improvements like that would be $150,000. We'd like to bring an overhead door in there so we can move equipment in and out of there much easier. I just kind of threw in a furnishing and expense budget. We don't know there is no specific plan for what would go in there. A lot of ideas are being tossed about, but nothing that I can come to you and say it's a specific number. And then, obviously, we would paint it and provide lighting and a new ceiling and things like that, depending on what the facility ends up looking like. So we estimate those costs to come in around $540,000. If you're looking for an ROI on this, you're at like 2 years, 3 years for sure that it would pay for itself. But again, I know we're throwing numbers out there. This is the finance committee, but to me, this is really, what path are we heading down? It's so much less than having to do with money than people might be saying. So that's some background information that we compiled. And now we'll take any questions or feedback or thoughts on next steps.
Mrs. Voigt?
You had a chance to meet with the Booster Club. How did that discussion go? What were some of the topics that were discussed at that point?
Good, actually, we met, well, actually it was the night of the October school board meeting. That's why I was late. It was a good discussion. There was probably the principal and Carl, who's here virtually, were there. Kyle and I were there, and I would say there was about 8 other parents, maybe 10. A couple showed up a little later. But it was in the, one board member or booster club member was actually has a child who's a swimmer, but she offered to be here tonight. She's out of town on business, but it was, one person said, well, where you been? We've been talking about changing this over to a weight room. And so it was very positive. It was a positive night, though, because we also went out there to talk about our desire to do other improvements itself, but with the water, stormwater thing, we showed them the maps and all of that. So it was a very cordial conversation.
Mr. Wad?
Thank you. I have a number of questions. I'll just ask a couple and then obviously give other people an opportunity before I go through all of them. I guess the first question I have centers around the current co-ops we have. So if I saw correctly, each one of our high schools currently co-ops with a high school that is not a part of our district. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I also saw that there is only one other sport in which that's the case, which is hockey, I believe.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious, what's special about swim that instead of doing inter-co-ops, we co-op with schools outside of our district who I assume have a reason for wanting to co-op as well and are coming to Waukesha for it?
Just that we have pools.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess I kind of wanted to flush that out. So the reality is CMH doesn't have a pool, Pewaukee doesn't have a pool, Kettle Moraine doesn't have a pool, McGuanago doesn't have a pool, right? So the conclusion I can draw from this, and I'm wondering if we can get these numbers or if you have them, what percentage of high schools in the state of Wisconsin, public schools at least, have a pool? Is it 80%? Is it 20%? Is it 5%? I'm curious. And I'll get to where I'm driving with this in a minute, but it seems to me that we ought to be contemplating the idea that perhaps pools are not something from an equity perspective we need to be thinking about. All kinds of schools in the state in all kinds of different districts don't have pools, and it's because they're expensive to build, expensive to maintain, and I think the participation rates, depending upon what schools you're talking about, wouldn't justify that level of investment. We're fortunate in this district, it sounds like, to have two first-class pools that are able to be utilized for competition. Can someone confirm for me that what we heard in public comments is correct, that the North Pool is not properly sized for?
The North Pool is a meter pool,
Okay.
which I can tell you less than 1% of the high schools in the state of Wisconsin have that.
Following along the co-op, I guess one of the things I'd be curious to understand is, I assume there is some sort of financial consideration we get from the schools that we co-op with. I'm assuming Pewaukee provides some sort of share of their costs, of the cost. Do they contribute anything towards the upgrade or maintenance of any of the pools at the schools they co-op with?
Now, each sport you co-op with, you do an individual calculation of coaches' costs, and like if it's hockey, there's ice time, and there's different things like that. But there's no significant funding being made for the maintenance of our pools. And we can provide you the numbers that we've billed the neighboring school districts for their participation on the swim teams.
Mr. Watt,
Coincidentally, Mr. Watt, I had the same question about just the number of co-ops that exist. And so just given the timing of the end of the season with sectionals and the state meet coming, I went and just pulled down the WIAA schedule and looked at the number of teams. Now, it's a little bit different than some other sports because there are a lot of D1 teams because they're based on total enrollment of all the schools that are co-oping. So there's a longer list of D1s, shorter list of D2s, and I can share this with the rest of the committee if they're interested, but approximately, and I mean, please don't, I'm not pretending to be completely accurate here, but approximately 30-ish out of 80 slots in the D1 were a co-op of at least one team, and approximately 18 of 50-ish on the D2. So at least a third of the teams are representing one or more schools. And obviously, and if I just look across Waukesha County, some of the schools that you mentioned, with the exception of Arrowhead and Muskego, everybody is co-oping because they're just taking advantage of what pools we have available. And I think, as we all know, Arrowhead's had some of the same challenges with a pool that's about the same age as North's, but is regulation size. But they continue to have an individual team. I know they had considered possibly co-oping, I think, with, again, other teams across the county or the area. And then if you just kind of look at what schools tend to have pools, they're schools, districts that have been around for a while, more often like single school, single high school districts, but, not as many as I would have thought, so.
All right, I wanted to just kind of provide my thoughts on just listening to the feedback, but when I take a look at what we're trying to do, right, there's the fiscal responsibility that we have to the community is to understand how much it costs to maintain, support, and build maintenance with this pool. Then I take a look at the other piece, which is utilization. So the capacity and the utilization of the pool versus a weight room or a secondary gym. When I hear that we've got effectively about 60% of the use is not to serve the district of Waukesha, but other districts, it would tell me that the other two pools have capacity to pick up potentially what the use is at North. The one piece that I would say that it concerns me is ensuring that the Special Olympics finds a place where all of the same amenities and pieces for their competitions can work as well. But I think in noting that, it'd be helpful to understand really what the utilization and the cost piece is to that, because just hearing and looking at the metrics, I'm not sure what the rationale would be to continue to maintain a cost that we can avoid and offer all of our other athletic programs as well as groups a resource to use that they don't currently have, which would be serving a far broader group of our school district of Waukesha community than we are currently doing right now with the pool. That is my take on how it is currently presented. Mr. Vaughn. Mrs. Voigt.
I'm hearing the idea of a weight room or an extended gym. Have we decided what that new
No,
purpose area would be?
the weight room was when I met with the Booster Club. That was the idea they had a couple years ago, and that's what they wanted. Well, this is a couple people talking. I don't know if they represented the entire Booster Club, just to be clear. But that was the idea that they were knocking around. I think Carl's here, but we've talked a little bit about, you could fit a basketball court in there. You could hang batting cages in there. Gymnastics and the dance teams could take over those spaces. It could be used as a testing space for state testing and things like that. But we really haven't gotten, I put the measurements in board docs just to give you an idea of scale of how big the space was, but we really haven't gotten gotten to a specific strategy on what the space will be.
And that would be important to have, is to understand from the community that it would then serve, what is the value of potentially offering.
If it's like other flex gyms, the middle schools have auxiliary spaces like that, and they're used for multiple purposes, and my guess is that, depending on the season, might have a different use, but you're right, we're gonna have to design something, right, and bring you a number eventually, if that's the decision of the board.
I do think there is an appeal to what this could be, but without, excuse me, the further view, we'll kind of leave that up to you, Mr. Wad.
Yeah, so I guess along those lines, right, we need to understand on one hand how that space might be utilized differently. But if there is going to be a decision that we want to maintain a pool, what does that look like? Not just for next year or 3 years from now, but, and I believe Dr. Piasek alluded to issues that Arrowhead is experiencing with their pool, and I believe it's very similar in age to ours. If I remember the article that I read about that, they're looking at nearly $10 million in additional costs in order to maintain a pool of that age going forward. Eventually, things start to break. It's like, if you're a homeowner, you know how this works, right? Do we have any sense for what that would look like? I mean, because it seems to me that if we're gonna keep a pool at North, we ought to start talking about what's it gonna mean to actually keep a pool at North for longer than just a couple or 3 years. Because if it's not gonna be any longer than that, then we really ought to be talking about, at this particular point in time when we're gonna be making the investment in HVAC already, rather than redoing that work 2, 3, 5 years from now. You know, dealing with this right now, and I think we need to understand what the alternative is to utilizing the space, which is, what does maintaining or having to potentially rebuild a pool look like if that's the decision that we want to go with? Because as I look at the numbers, all I'm seeing is what we think the cost will be per year based on the pool just remaining as it is today. But it's going to continue to deteriorate, and I'm certain we will continue to find that age will bring about additional problems. What are the most common ones for a pool of that age? What do we expect that will look like? And if we're going to keep it, now would be the time to have a plan for what that looks like as well.
And I will second on that, specifically and add in the safety feature. So with Arrowheads, theirs was an electrical issue that was underneath the pool that would have required it was a, do we maintain, right? But the risk to the students. So the other piece to that is the safety of the students as well.
Okay, we can bring that information.
Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. Oh, Mrs. White?
That's right.
I think the important thing, and I'm hearing from everybody's comments, right? We're not coming at this from a financial perspective. The consideration of what to do next with the pool is really driven by making that investment in the HVAC, which we're doing because we anticipate being in the building for a long time. So what happens next is really a question of what the local community within North is really going to be interested in. It's not going to be something that's driven by the board, but is something that's going to come back to the board, especially given the financial considerations. And that's something we kind of have to weigh out. What are the cost trade-offs and what are the utilization opportunities so that we get the greatest use out of the square footage that we have at the right cost, and that, to Mr. Wad's point, that it's sustainable for a long period of time. I think, unfortunately, swim is like a lot of other sports where there's just declining participation, and I think the world of co-oping is just going to be something that we're going to see a lot of going forward. It's hard. I've seen, students from North have to participate in a sport, and they get listed on the WIAA website as being from Waukesha South, and that doesn't always feel good. But I also just want to acknowledge that, as a county, we cooperate with other districts and schools on a lot of things, not necessarily sports, but certainly academics. And I think, especially as it relates to Catholic Memorial, I know that not every student that attends Catholic Memorial lives in the school district of Waukesha, but there are a whole lot of people who attend Catholic Memorial High School who are paying taxes that support our operations here. So I do think that there's just a trade-off in terms of how we cooperate with other districts. And obviously, sports haven't gotten to that inter-district co-op as much as they have with swim and hockey, but a lot of that, again, has to do with facilities and access to athletes. But we've just seen in so many sports that, and it's not, again, not unique to Waukesha, just look at the number of co-op teams that are out there. So it's probably something we have to continue to contend with. If we could be confident even that we would stay at the numbers that Mr. Clark presented today, I think we could come up with some interesting ideas about how to go forward. Obviously, we don't want to leave any other schools that have been partnering with us out in the cold, so to speak, but none of us have a crystal ball, so we don't know what that's going to look like. And I think as we've talked about the express swim contract earlier, I understand they're struggling with numbers, but that could also change. I look at what's happening in some of the volleyball programs, and it's just really exciting, and those programs are growing. So I don't know if we've ever seen it where we've had co-ops and then we didn't. But I think in some cases, just preferences and interests change. So we're not coming at this, I'm not coming at this from the perspective of, I have something that I want to happen with the pool. I want whatever happens with the pool at North to be what is going to work best for the North community and the students in the athletics community. And there are a lot of things that happen in there. I've seen several of the cardboard boat races, and it's pretty phenomenal. I think that kind of excitement can exist in a pool maybe that's not attached to the school. It wouldn't be the same, but there's a lot of things we have to think about how to move or replace those things or not, and what that means. But as far as utilization goes, I think we're looking at numbers that are saying we might not need 3 pools across the school district of Waukesha, but across Waukesha County, there aren't a whole lot of pools left.
Mrs. White?
I think one of the things, before we make a decision, would be that utilization right now. How many kids are taking swimming classes? How many kids are taking lifeguard training classes? What's the time that the special ed, not special, Olympics use of the pool? What's the time period for that? How many meets are they having? What kinds of experience is that all about? Just the total, how often is the pool just sitting there, and how often is it actually being of use to the community and to the broader community, not just North High School, but Kettle Moraine and, other areas as well. I'm glad that,
I'm ready.
yeah, I'm glad that this was a discussion item and not an action item tonight, because it's like, there's so many unknowns yet before I feel comfortable making a decision.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Yeah, I guess for me, the most important thing is utilization of the space. I think that everybody talks about equity, but utilizing that space for something different, would that affect more students, more of the community? I think that would be true equity in this. Another thing we have to remember is, like David said, as that pool ages and we have to fix it, replace it, the one itself, we needed a referendum to do. There's no way we're going to be able to fund it out of our current budget by any stretch. So that would be another referendum on there. And if it's coming close to the time, its livable lifespan, that's going to be a discussion we're going to have in the next couple of years, I would think. So, like I said, for me, that space should be utilized to the greatest impact for the district and the greatest impact to our students. And I think that's what we have to decide, whether or not, is there something that we need more than a pool in that space? The district that I work in does not have a pool. They use the WISE pool for their swim program. So there's a lot of pools, and there's a lot of schools that don't co-op, find a way to get pool time. So, but maximum utilization, I think, is the most important thing for us as a district. Not have a pool that's sitting vacant that we could be using for something else, that space for something else.
Mr. Webb?
Yes, thank you. So, Dr. Piasek, I want to kind of follow up on some comments you made. I certainly don't want to give the impression that I'm interested in squeezing other county schools out of leveraging resources we have available. My point was probably more to the utilization within the district is such that we co-op with other schools outside of our district when we could co-op within with our own schools first. And from my perspective, that ought to be, if we're looking at utilization across the district of a resource like the pools, that's where we should look first. Obviously, our taxpayers are bearing the brunt of the cost of building and maintaining them first, so. But I completely understand. We want to look for ways to help other school districts that don't have these resources, and we do. And I think we need to be smart about how we do that, so. I guess,
Can
yes.
I respond to that?
Yes.
Briefly, do you mind?
No, go ahead.
I actually think we're in agreement. I'm just looking at, we've got signed co-op agreements with some of these other schools that run for 2-year periods beyond and into next school year. So that's what I'm wanting to keep in mind, is also that, you know, we've made commitments to partner with these other schools, and we just need to kind of consider that. Now, some of these other schools are considering referendum questions for their communities, and I don't believe that any of them are asking for pools, but maybe they don't think they need one, so. But yeah, that's what I was kind of referring to, not kind of, that's what I was referring to. I just want to make sure that we're kind of having those conversations. I don't want to take your time, David, but one of the things that I think became clear to me, just as this topic was coming forward, is that there are a lot of stakeholders that probably haven't had a chance to voice their perspectives or share some of the impacts that they're anticipating experiencing, and I think that's a really important part of all of this.
Yes, thank you, and that's actually a good segue to kind of where I was going next. I, like probably all the board members here, have gotten several communications from people, particularly within the North community, who I think have felt blindsided by this, particularly people within the swim community at North, and that concerns me. I guess I understand that, you know, we went to the Booster Club and there were at least one swim parent there, and I believe we had representation from the administration. I'm not asking anyone to answer to this. I'm just asking that we be more cognizant when we have something like this coming up, that we are communicating early and clearly and transparently with all of our stakeholders about these sorts of potential projects, so that we're gathering that feedback as proactively as possible, rather than us hearing from people who feel as though they should have been notified and weren't. I'm not sure where that breakdown occurred, and I'm not asking anyone to answer it here, but I do think it's something that needs to be reviewed, and we need to understand how to make sure we're communicating more clearly with our stakeholders on these sorts of things that have a significant impact on our school communities when they crop up.
Mrs. White?
I totally agree. I think that the action item context of the school board agenda coming out on Friday, you know, before I had a chance to even look at in board docs, that this is just, it will be discussion, not, you know, your recommendation was not to have it be an action item. But when I first saw that, it's like, whoa, how did that happen without, you know, really a lot more discussion when you're talking about something as major as this, you know, being held. So I totally agree with your comment.
Right.
Mr. Roy?
Yeah, if I could just follow up on that, I mean, yeah, I was concerned about that as well. I'm glad that we were able to get that cleared up, that these were intended to be discussion items and not action items. But, I mean, so I understand that there was a meeting with the boosters a month ago, right? And my concern is if we had people from the school there that were present and heard the discussion, why we're hearing from people within the program and parents within the program that seems surprised that this was gonna even be a discussion item tonight. I don't believe that should happen. And again, I don't wanna point fingers at anyone, but I'm saying generally speaking, when we have things like this come up, and that is, look, I mean, people who've been a part of the North community, that pool has been there for as long as they can remember, right? There are significant events that have occurred there. Now, does that mean that we need to keep that pool open? Maybe, maybe not, but we need to get that feedback, and I'd rather we get it from being proactively engaging with those stakeholders and ensuring the people within the buildings are engaging with their swim staff and the people involved with the program, well in advance of it ever reaching this room, so that we've had an opportunity to gather all that feedback. And we can take that feedback into consideration when we are asked to make a decision as to what to do with that space.
Mrs. Voigt?
Just in the context of kind of long-range thinking, suggesting that we look at what is the useful life of that pool. You know, could it, you know, you're suggesting, you know, like over the next few years, but realistically, I think as we make a decision, that has got to be a part of that decision. If the useful life of a pool is only 55 years, 60 years, whatever it might be, that we realize that. And just wondering if we could defer the HVAC until the end of that lifespan, you know, kind of keep it in reserve and not necessarily invest big bucks into the gym area for a pool if it's only going to last 5 years. You know what I'm saying? You know, not a one-size-fits-all kind of, it has to be this way or that way. Could it be like 5 years down the line, looking at making this decision and leaving that HVAC money kind of in reserve to do that at that time?
I'm going to say what I think is the case. There's no reason we have to do that HVAC work. But I don't know if that leads us to the best outcome either, you know, but it is an option as well. The funding's there now, and we'd like to take advantage of it, but we have plenty of other HVAC projects that probably could be done with that, but using the ring and do report, for those of you who were on the board at that time, you know, this was identified as a unit that, like everything else in that area, is aging, so. But you're absolutely right. It's not mandated, it's A or B.
And if I recall, so that project includes some heavier hardware, but then there's also the digital controls piece, which is also creating an automation of some of that could present a cost savings in the short term. I think the other thing, and it's just really important that I say this out loud, right? The perception that somehow this pool conversation is related to the sustainability of the school is, you know, just driven by some just incorrect observations and of how we got here. But I do agree with Mrs. Voigt that if we can't come to a conclusion about what is going to happen, you know, so we've called it the pool project, but we don't actually know what the pool project is, right? So once we know what the pool project is, it would make sense to move forward on the HVAC piece. And I don't necessarily think we want to kick that for 4 or 5 years. But there are components of the HVAC project that could be done that don't necessarily require new big iron units, right?
Yeah, we've cut the POs for the HVAC work for the rest of the building. Some of those units have year-plus lead times, and so we've gone ahead with that until we figure out what this is exactly.
Mr. Todd?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to suggest that it would be, I think, helpful both to this body, the larger board, and the community, if we could put a series of at least, you know, high-level proposals of our options with that space. And I mean, I'd like to see something that tells us, what if we did nothing with it and we just went forward with the HVAC work in the rest of the school? What if we left the pool as is and did the HVAC work And I would assume we'd only do that if we felt like we were gonna continue to maintain that pool space for a long period, right? So going along with that would be, what kind of expectations do we have about costs that this district could incur for maintenance and perhaps redoing that pool to make it more useful? And then a proposal for what, at least from a high level, we think that space would be best utilized for. We've heard a lot of things that have just been kind of thrown out there: weight room, additional gym space. Maybe we can do all of that, I don't know. But I think it would be helpful for those in the community and those in the room to understand what are we looking at, and what is the community when they're looking at, what do they prefer, think is the best utilization of that space for the students that attend North, for the community, and for the taxpayers who will ultimately have to pay and maintain that space going forward.
Yeah, we could put together.
Mr. McCaffrey?
On the HVAC, is that primarily dehumidification? Because that would be the big deal with a pool. What's the current dehumidification look like?
So that would be part of it. So if you're looking at it, excuse me, if we went with the multi-purpose room, that would be 300,000. If we went with the upgrade for the pool space, that's 500,000. So that is part of the dehumidification.
Okay.
It's own, it's almost like a pool pack, they call it.
Yep,
It's a separate entity. It's a.
very important to a pool space, though.
Yep.
And how is the current dehumidification? Because I know that when we did the original pool itself, that stuff got replaced because the chlorine ate a hole in it.
Yep, it did, and
Quick.
even with South, as being as new as it is, it's a challenge.
Yep.
To keep it going. Our HVAC guys do a great job. But North, I'm just looking at the numbers here, and, you know,
Yeah,
one way or the other, we're gonna have to spend some money.
on dehumidification,
Yep.
for sure. So that's the HVAC that's got to be done. I mean, you can't let that go for a year or two.
Not for a
Because
long,
you'll destroy that space,
With
for sure.
Very quickly.
Yep. So that's what we have to think about when we're talking postponing HVAC. That's fantastic in a classroom, but in a pool, in a wet atmosphere like that, there's no deferring.
Yep. The other part of
Dehumidifying
that,
pool.
with Mr. McCaffrey, is that the longer we wait, the equipment costs keep on rising.
Yep. Oh, yeah, we know how that goes. Yeah, for sure.
So I think this was a really good discussion, but it truly comes back to the usefulness and the livelihood of the pool, and the concerns that we're hearing with the costs that it's going to take to either maintain and or upkeep. We need to really understand what that looks like and how long that lasts. And then just, I mean, again, the second piece that I would say is critical is the utilization. Okay, so useful life and the utilization, and how do we get the greatest impact to support our community? I think those are the pieces that we hear. And until we really have that picture as to how much left does this pool have to give safely without sending us in, then helps us drive where we go.
I just have one more, I think, easy follow-up question. Mr. Clark, was the weight room floor at North replaced recently? Do you know
last
that cost?
summer. And just so we're clear, the weight room isn't something administratively it was just an example of what
Yep.
was said at the booster club.
And the reason I bring that up, though, is because there may be uses that, you know, the school or the athletics families think would be great, and we may need to just, again, give what is the project, right? Some consideration to that, because I know there's been discussion about alternative locations for the weight room, but then we need to have ADA access points, and that can't necessarily, like in the mezzanine, that can't necessarily be accommodated. So just some additional thoughts that would need to go into. There's probably a lot of really good ideas, but some of those might not even be feasible, just given other circumstances related to the building, or they may undo some other investments that we've made elsewhere. So I think that just points to why a little bit more time is needed to figure out what the project is.
Great. Any other discussion? I see none. Mr. Clark, what are next steps then?
We'll gather some of the information, in particular, kind of a life expectancy report or feedback on the pool status as it stands now. And we did look at it just more just what we know just from maintaining the pool now and knowing the age of it. But if you get into structurally and all that, we obviously have to bring in someone who has a lot more knowledge in it than we do. We will, I think, what David brought up is laying out some options and kind of clarifying the decision, I think would be very helpful. So I'll lead the charge on that one and see. Now, whether we can turn that around by December with our meetings getting pushed up to the first week, I don't know. But the only thing that, we have time for this decision. The only thing that's out there that is a time-sensitive issue is those co-op agreements. In that list, which I'll share, sorry, I couldn't project them better. I think it was the boys' teams all are on the cycle where by this February 1st, we have to recommit for a two-year commitment. And those agreements are really WIA driven. We can't just customize a 13-year lease type of thing. It's 2 years or not. But what isn't in those agreements, from what I've gathered, is what's the site that the co-op will be run at. So you could do the co-ops and then still have some options, I guess, but you'd have to have a space. So, but I have a lot of things here. The amount that we're paying, our districts are paying us for co-ops, kind of a total usage for the facility, and what would North look like with a multi-use space? What would that utilization look like? So those are some. We'll continue to work with the Special Olympics in securing an option. I think if nothing else, that will lead us to know we at least have that option in case something, because things do happen to pools. South experienced it not too long ago. So that's all good information. I have, I think, 12 or 15 bullet points here, but I don't think you want me to read them all, so.
Correct. Thank you. Okay. Seeing that, we're moving on then to our discussion and information items. The first item is the budget assumptions. I feel like we have been in an endless budget discussion, so here we are to next year.
Yeah, so every year we go through this. We used to give November off to F&F to think budget, but the topic's always, it seems like the issues are bigger than everything else, so we bumped that back a couple years ago. But it's really kind of the same set of assumptions, and we use these assumptions so we all agree. We use the Robert W. Baird budget forecasting model, and then in January, more than likely, we'll come back with what our budget projection looks like long-term, and it's about I think it's a 4-year current plus 4 years forecast, and just gives us some direction in terms of the development of the budget and the choices we may or may not have to be making going forward. But I do this up front, so when I bring back the projections and board members don't like it, all of a sudden they're not looking at, well, assumption 22 looks funny. Now I can say we all kind of agreed that, not that we can't change these assumptions as we go, but for that baseline data, I always like us just to kind of agree on the key issues. So I'll just go down the list, and it's under revenue, but resident enrollment, we've talked about that tonight in terms of sports teams and being able to field them, but as you know, we've been declining for a decade now. I usually use a 1.25% drop, but with Mill Creek and these other things out there, I've dropped that to 1.5% drop. In our third Friday, I use the third Friday count of September as the benchmark. So the 1.5% drop of our resident enrollment that goes into the revenue limit calculation. So this year we dropped to below 11,000. That used to be 13,000 not too awfully long ago. The nice thing about the 24-25 budget is it's the second year of a biennial budget. We know the structure of funding going in, unless everyone in Madison agrees on something different, which I don't think they're probably going to talk about it again. So right now, it's an increase in revenue limit authority of $325 per pupil. It's currently 11,000. No change in the previous year's participation levels for open enrollment in and out, but we will adjust it for again, we have a state budget in place, so we know what open enrollment funding in and out will be for regular ed and special ed. Per pupil aid, we know that's not moving. The only thing that'll move the amount of per pupil aid we get is fewer kids, because it's per pupil. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Right now, we're estimating that CPI for employee compensation will come in at 4.5%. I'm assuming that we use the same costing methodology as we've used in the past, that it's 4.5% of the base wage of the salary scale. Again, CPI is only a mandatory factor in teacher or represented groups. For us, it's just the teacher group. But we also use that to kind of shadow the settlements with the other groups, so that's an important number to consider. Health insurance, our approach to health insurance in the past, and now we've had 2 years in a row of no increase in health insurance. But what I've used to do is make the assumption that we're going to fund a 5% increase in health insurance. So if they come in and say, hey, Darren, the renewal is at 10, plan design changes will get us to 5. But again, we can look at those numbers. I'm just trying to get you a projection up front, and then we can work our way from them. Dental insurance, we're hoping to hold the rates again. Pupil transportation, we'll talk about that in a little bit. We're going to budget a market rate increase, and I'm working on defining what a market rate increase for 24-25 is. Utilities, and I group all utilities, water is certainly part of that, but electrical and everything else. A 10% increase. Parental choice programs, we had a significant increase in those this year, 40%. And so I'm budgeting a 15% growth just because I don't think we can keep at that pace. But this one's only important in terms of when we get to the point of projecting what a levy might look like, because the revenue of being able to levy more comes with the matching expenditure, so it's budget neutral. But you need to have something in there, and I don't think putting zero growth or zero change in there is a good idea. I just mentioned tax levy. The revenue limit is going up $325 per pupil. State aid, the pool of money at the state level is also budgeted to increase, but where we mesh out with 425 other school districts in that equation is hard to predict. So in the initial phase of our budget building process is really, can we pay our bills, regardless of the funding place? And then once more information, mainly where's our year end for this fiscal year coming out, we get into aid and some projections. And I think you all got used to my tax scenario sheet where it ran kind of bookends and the midpoint. We'll have those conversations as well. And then the phase 3, and I guess some of the ESSER HVAC work as well, but the phase 3 of the capital improvement projects, some of those costs will roll into 24-25, so we'll factor that in because the fiscal year changes right in the middle of our construction season, so you never get it all in one fiscal year, nice and neat, like you do the school year. So those are the assumptions, but we can talk through that. This is just to frame our conversation, and I can answer any questions on why you think these recommendations are being made.
Thank you. I just have a couple. Health insurance in particular. So the recent market analysis for the next year is posing that health insurance rates are going to rise somewhere between 8 and 18%. And so the last couple of years, we have, as a district, absorbed all of that and not passed on to our employees, correct?
Yeah, we've taken the approach, we've utilized reserves if we need them. We're self-funded, so if there's no claims, we don't have to pay. But I've heard those numbers too, around low double digits.
Yeah. And then that leads up to kind of the balloon of the reserve that we had, where we've taken a look at how that grew over the pandemic era, waiting for claims to be presented and where that puts us and how we navigate through that. I think this may be the year to take a look at that.
Yeah, and in the flow of the conversation with health insurance, by March, I'll have estimates from our consultants on what renewals are looking like. So we'll begin work on getting to 5 or 0 or whatever this percentage, or whatever we think we need to do at that time, and come in with plan design changes. So that always comes to the board as a separate action item outside of the budget, because it's such a big topic, right? It's very personal, very important to everybody. So that conversation will actually get wrapped up probably in April. So, and we don't approve till October, so the good thing is we'll know early. But what that is, and if it is plan design changes, we'll make a recommendation for changes. If it's like this year, sometimes the feds mandate a change. It wasn't our doing, but sometimes they're just given to us or provided to us as well.
Great, then I have just one other item. So the parental choice programs, when we take a look at how that impacts, one of the pieces we've talked a lot about as a board is marketing. Public relations, communication, marketing, and talking about strategic branding for what STW is. And I think one of the great opportunities we have is to build out that branding to be able to essentially get choice in, right? Our goal is to be a great school district. Waukesha is competitive. We have a lot to offer. We're diverse. We've got a tremendous amount of offerings that I'd really like to make sure that we are incorporating somehow into this next budget cycle. How are we going to market, brand, build that in more so than what we are doing? And as far as I can really see, eAchieve is the one that holds the bulk of our marketing budget. Any other discussion, comments? Dr. Piasek.
Thank you. Maybe just touching back on the WASB Fall Legislative Conference that I attended on Saturday, and once I get the slides sent out from them, I'll share them with all of you. There was a pretty lengthy presentation presented by the Population Studies Group at UW-Madison that spoke to just changes in overall population and what they expected in terms of public school enrollment. So these are trends that we need to obviously keep an eye on. They also, that's the group that actually did our population study maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. And they even shared, like, they had projections for the state for a number of districts that were, you know, kind of linearly decreasing, but obviously with the circumstances around 2020 and 2021, things changed pretty dramatically. There was a significant shift to private schools, and then there was the blip, obviously, that a lot of districts saw on virtual learning, and then that has actually come back down pretty sharply. So I think we should spend some time looking at those numbers and those trends. Obviously, we can't predict what those numbers are going to be, but I think we can make a good estimate, and we can have a decent amount of confidence that there just aren't more students coming. So we have to be prepared for what that's going to look like. I think that in terms of levying and spending per pupil, we probably couldn't be any less. And I think relatively speaking to districts around us, we're at the bottom. And I know that we're on par with a few other districts that also came up to the low revenue limit. But most of those districts have ongoing operational referendums, or they have other facilities-based referendums. And so the mill rate, I think it gets really tricky these days because everybody's continues to go down because property values continue to go up. So I struggle with it as a metric and even as a comparison district to district because it just doesn't have all the information. So just as we're preparing for next year's budget, I think we should consider looking at things like cost per student who's actually in a district facility, cost per student that maybe is passing through to either through a voucher or to another facility. And just consider, again, what does it take for us to actually educate a student in our schools? There are some good benchmark districts that are single high school only type districts in the area that we could kind of look at and compare ourselves to. But mill rate is just not a useful metric. It kind of wasn't before, but it definitely isn't now because with all the changes in EAV and property values and then the other thing that I just wanted to point out, and this just comes from, you know, lots of really digging in and trying to understand where we're at with this. Despite what the mill rate and the levy is, there was a substantial increase to this, the
Property
sorry,
tax credit.
What's that?
The state levy tax.
Yeah, the school levy tax credit. I knew it was SLTC, I just couldn't remember what it stands for. The school levy tax credit is substantial to the tune of like more than 25% this year and another 25% on top of that next year, like 235 and then 335 million or something. So a lot of people will see an increase in that school levy tax credit on their property taxes, but we don't necessarily have control over that. So the average person is likely to have a lower overall net due for school taxes. But this is unfortunately the result of a very complex system where, the state kind of controls a pool of money and then is pushing it around. And so increasing the local tax levy, but then pushing some of the state taxes back is just, unfortunately, it just is far too complex. And I guess I don't have the authority to change it, but I would if I could. But having said that, I do think that mill rate is ultimately just not a good metric for us to be working with. And I think we need to spend a little bit of time looking back at how that school levy tax credit actually gets applied to the different municipalities within our district, because it is different depending on if you live in Pewaukee or Brookfield or the city or the town of Waukesha. They're just very different numbers.
Just a quick follow-up on the enrollment projections, because the last one we had was in 2020. I do call them every year to see if there's anything significant going on that would cause us to have another study done, but I've never gone more than 5 years. So I'll reach out to them again and see if this is the year to have it updated to see. But what I think they struggle in is they're good at telling us how many kids are kind of in the community. In their trend line, the numbers are a little different from my third Friday count, but their trend line is held pretty good. But that doesn't now more and more equate to how many kids are we teaching in our buildings. How many of them are in Mill Creek? Not that those are bad choices, but it's a different playing field. But their data has been very strong. But one other thing they provided in 2020 was a statewide study that they did. And they gave that up as an option. And I have a copy of that, and maybe I'll send it out, but it just shows a steady decline of students statewide. So retaining and recruiting, if we can retain as many kids as we can, I think is our best option at this point. Which ties into your marketing.
Thank you.
Right.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, so I actually was gonna suggest this as a topic, but since Dr. Piasek raised it, she's absolutely correct. There was a substantial increase that the legislature provided for the school levy tax credit. And I think it was 255 million for this year. So, I see other school districts who often will talk about this when they send out their information about, how their property tax bill is ultimately going to be, impacted. I kind of like the approach that we take right now, because it just talks about the levy, and we don't confuse it with things that are out of our control, right? However, I do think it might be beneficial for us as a board and for those that follow us by watching the meetings to have that kind of explained to us, how that may impact property taxpayers this year. And I think if I'm right, we would be talking about that right around the time that property tax bills will be coming out. So that might be helpful for our citizens to understand that while we increase the levy, it doesn't necessarily mean it increased their property taxes. Because there is this significant influx of money. I believe KM is estimating an additional $2 million of tax relief for the citizens in their district as a result of that increase. I don't know how the formula would play out here, but I do think it's something that we would benefit from learning more about. I also would like, if we could, at the next F&F meeting, to understand a little bit more about how net new construction has impacted the levy and the share that existing taxpayers, people who had homes already, may or may not have benefited from the additional net new construction in terms of the total tax burden that they carry as an individual homeowner, if that data is available to us.
Yeah, that data is out there for the new construction. The only thing I would, I mean, not to say we can't do it, because we can come up with something very close, is they tend to break it down by municipality. Well, we don't serve all of Brookfield, so we'll have to make some general assumptions, and and maybe that's out there by school district, I don't know, but when I ran some of those numbers as part of or leading up to our approval last month, to me, if you take the city, the village of Waukesha, that is such a large slice, and just talked about that, maybe that would provide the information you're looking for. But one thing on the lottery tax credit, and I know David and I talked about this, one of the reasons I don't spend a lot of time talking about it is, first of all, it's not in our financials. We don't control it, but also, people don't look at two different lines on their tax bill and go, oh yeah, I have to net this out. So I've never focused, because people look at school district and they just go around and look at the percentages. But I think a presentation on all of those things together is not a bad idea, especially around December, right?
So one of the things, Mr. Watt, for recommendations for future business, that we can take those action items, I'm wondering if that is better served as a workshop. This is a topic that our community has raised largely about understanding, and you hear every time we talk about a budget, they hear levy, they hear increase, right? And we try to talk, we've talked at some points, I think, ad nauseum in an F&F meeting or even at a board meeting, trying to re-explain it. But the complexity and the details that go into a school financial and a budget and how that equates to what you can expect to see on your property tax bill, I think may be better served in a workshop.
So you're talking about a board workshop?
Yes, and open to the public.
Okay. Are those typically recorded and made available for public consumption? Yeah, so,
So your recommendation is to host this at an F&F meeting,
well,
or what?
not the full workshop. I mean, it may be a great topic for a full workshop for all of us on the board that have to grapple with the budget, right, and understanding where that fits in. But I also think something that can easily be referenced by our citizens to understand, what is this SLTC that shows up on my property tax bill? What is it related to? Helping people understand, like, this is money that's used to offset the cost of your property taxes, specifically targeted to the school district. And then the net new construction to help people understand that when there is construction and when there is new businesses that come into the district, that they help to defray the cost of public education would be beneficial to them, because I think those often get lost and they just see a line item on their property tax bill and they may not have any idea what it is or why it's there, or even where that money comes from or what it's designed to offset for them. So,
Okay, Darren, we can take a look. Sure. Okay, Dr. Piasek.
Thank you. My bigger concern about the school levy tax credit is what people are going to feel when it goes away. So this big amount, this bolus of amount is coming. For the most part, I think a lot of districts around us have stayed plus or minus, 2-3%. But I do think that people are going to see an impact to the bottom line of their tax bill, and that's going to be confusing. So I don't know to what degree it benefits us to have it as a discussion topic in the committee, unless we maybe had a white paper or something that could kind of guide the conversation. I've looked a lot at how other districts have tried to communicate this to their constituents, and I think a lot of people like me open up the bill and you grumble and you pay it. But once I did start paying attention, you really do see how the numbers impact each other. The mill rate is the mill rate. It factors in new construction, but the bottom line of those bills, and I think especially for people in the city of Waukesha who are dealing with increases to water, I mean, Pewaukee's having increases to garbage pickup. There's a lot of things that impact that. we can't necessarily control, but this is a big number. And that's my bigger concern, is that after this biennial budget expires, like every other bolus of state or federal infused dollars that goes away, people are gonna feel that. So I think probably within this cycle, we're gonna have to find a way to explain it.
And I think it's a fair takeaway. I think that the caveat I have on this is that it is a very complex piece, and trying to understand what our role and responsibility is in the community, right, to navigate the district dollars and the budget and the presentation, and how we best serve and educate our constituents to understand taxes is like me explaining your federal income taxes, that I could do down to that. So there is definitely a art and a science to being able to speak to this, that I just want to make sure that we do it in a way that many can understand.
And one other thought that we could also consider going forward, as kind of David mentioned, maybe about the time that the tax bills come out, we could just walk through one.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Any other thoughts, financial advice, pieces to go through? Okay, in saying that, we are set to talk about our monthly budget report. Mrs. Voigt.
Before we get to that, I just want to make one suggestion to change the calendar that's also in the last segment. It starts out with the date of the 13th instead of today, the 6th.
Oh,
So just because we're in this
Yeah.
week kind of configuration, just the very first number is,
I was thinking basing it off the board meeting. Which,
okay.
I don't know, we can change that though, yeah, it's an easy enough change.
I would, actually, I would agree with Mr. Clark. I think we should keep it with the board. The board is the overall governing unit that
And my
decides.
thought was the board eventually is gonna kind of give the,
Correct.
through consensus, the assumptions are good in the calendar, but that was what my thought process was. Again, it's not a big change one way or the other.
What's
It's,
happening on the 13th?
the date's the 13th, yeah, so that, yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying, I was thinking Monday,
Yeah.
Wednesday,
No,
I'm sorry.
no, just a matter of 6th or 8th.
No, I
8th
can
would
make
be
that
fine,
happen.
but
Got it,
this,
got it.
I got you. Running out of,
It's Monday. It's been a Monday,
Not the 13th.
not the 13th. Okay, monthly budget report.
on your desk, or was handed out the final budget booklet for 23-24. A lot of good information in here, broken down by object numbers is what we call it, and by fund and then by object numbers, so feel free to page through that. And some of the line items, you'll notice, the far right, there'll be some little explanations why, like, equipment purchases, I put in there like ESSER HVAC and little notes like that. Again, Fund 27 Special Ed, if you want to look at that, we did increase staffing for the Special Ed Department as part of this year's budget. And then we got talking in terms of the levy and where we should end up in the defeasance and all of that. The district's debt schedule, assuming no changes are made, these are the scheduled payments, is on page 22, just so you can see that. And then on that page, the annual tax levy, again, if we weren't defeasing, that's what that number is. That's why it doesn't match in Fund 39, because we are defeasing. And then there's 25 years of tax levy rate and property valuation agreement in the back, which I think is helpful at times. The aid, equalization aid and revenue limits in here too, if you want to see. In particular, I use it the most for enrollment on the left-hand side. And then on page 26 is my attempt to look at taxation on how each municipality is going to fare, because the average house in the district's going to go up 2.88%. And you can just see the movement that goes on just within our boundaries, and then extrapolate that across a state of 426 school districts. And then I will correct the calendar. And that's all we have.
Great, and this is,
And everything we have in terms of how we're performing. Everything's within budgeted parameters so far, so we're not seeing anything alarming.
The budget is on board docs, correct? We've loaded it to the website.
If not, we'll do that tomorrow. Yep.
Great.
We have out there 3 years of budget books and 3 years of financials. And we haven't been audited yet for last year, or we've been audited, it's still, we don't have a final report yet, so that's not out there, but the 3 prior years to that are there.
Wonderful, great. Any questions? Okay, we do have a need to go into closed session. Is that correct, Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Right. No, well, I thought we hit him. Any other future recommendations? I know we kind of jumped through that one earlier, so we've got those recommended by Mr. Wad. Any other topics for future meetings? Seeing none, I'd be looking for a motion then to move into closed session. Mr. Wad?
I would adjourn, or I would move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85 sub 1 sub E for deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing in public funds, or conducting other specified public business wherever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session.
Second?
Second, moved and seconded. Would you please take the roll call?
Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
Dr. Palusa?
Aye.
Mr. Wad?
Aye.
Mrs. White?
Aye.
Ms. Kozowski?
Aye. Passes 5-0. That concludes our Finance and Facilities meeting for today. As we move into closed session, our next meeting is Monday, December 11th, 5:30 in the boardroom. Thanks. Have a good night.